The emergency tone came through the cable ship's bridge speakers at 2:14 and made every conversation on board stop in the middle. Tess Arden was halfway inside an open relay cabinet with one hand on a fiber harness when the first alert sounded. The ship rolled once under her feet. The gulf outside was black and flat and looked, through the bridge glass, like a thing pretending to sleep. "Unknown distress burst," the comms officer said. Tess backed out of the cabinet and wiped her hands on her coveralls. She did not move closer. She had learned after Orpheus that bad news could cross a room on its own. The comm speaker cracked once, then cleared into a voice she knew well enough for her body to recognize it before her mind did. "This is Lower Habitat Medical. We have 6 alive. Repeat, 6 alive. Surface platform compromised. Transfer spine flaying. If you are not Helix Control, do not hand us back to Helix Control." Everyone on the bridge looked at Tess. She stood very still. Mara's voice had changed in 5 years. Less brightness, more metal in it. But it was Mara. The captain said, "You know that voice?" Tess nodded once. The speaker crackled again. This time another voice came through. Male, clipped, too controlled. "All non-essential vessels in Grid Sector Echo 9, be advised Orpheus Array has experienced a catastrophic systems event. Lower habitat is presumed lost. Containment is active. Do not approach under any circumstances. Helix." Same polished calm, same arrangement of language around a decision already made. Tess crossed the bridge in 4 steps and took the spare headset from the console before anyone could decide whether to offer it. "Lower habitat, this is Cable Vessel St. Brigid receiving you. Say again survivor count." The silence that followed was not empty. It was signal fighting water. Then Mara came back. "Tess?" She closed her eyes once, opened them. "Yeah." Something small and ragged moved through the headset. Not quite relief. "Not yet. I need you to listen carefully," Mara said. 6 alive. 1 critical. Carbon scrubbers failing in 2 hours, maybe less. Helix is preparing a purge from the surface manifold. If they trigger it, they'll flood the spine, seal the lower ring, and call it containment. "Why?" Mara did not answer right away. "Because the blast wasn't an accident," she said. The bridge felt colder than it had a minute ago. The captain's face had gone flat in the way people wear when money and liability have just entered the room. "Mara," Tess said, "what failed?" "Not what. Who?" Static bit across the line. "I don't have time for the long version. You need a recovery vessel, not lawyers. There's a service ship 32 miles north, call sign Caliban. Ask for Work Vale. Tell him Sloane said Black Current." The bridge speakers came alive with Helix Control cutting across the frequency. "Unidentified vessel. You are interfering with a managed industrial emergency. Break off contact immediately." Tess kept her mouth near the headset microphone. "How long before they purge?" 40 minutes if they're moving honestly. 20 if they're scared." Mara's voice dropped. "Tess, listen to me. If the surface says we're gone, it means they need us gone." Then the line died hard enough to pop in her ear. No one on the bridge spoke for a beat. The captain cleared his throat. "That facility's under Helix contract. We are not equipped for subsea recovery at depth, and we are very much not authorized to get in the middle of whatever that was." Tess set the headset down carefully. The service ship she named. "Get me its position." "Tess, get me its position." He did. Maybe because of her face. Maybe because he had heard the same thing she had. 6 alive, and a company already picking verbs for their deaths. The Caliban was 104 feet of black hull and tired paint, riding just north of a broken weather line. It had no corporate logo, no visible client markings, and more deck crane than a support vessel that size strictly needed. Tess made the transfer by launch in 10-foot dark water with a go bag, an old dive log she did not know why she had brought, and the feeling that 5 years had just reached up out of the gulf and put a hand around her throat. Rourke Vale met her on deck in a foul-weather jacket and a knit cap bleached by salt. He had a face Weather had worked on honestly. "You running rescuer piracy?" "Depends who writes the report." He led her below without waiting to see whether she followed. The operations room held 3 people, a bank of older monitors, a pressure schematic of Orpheus Array on the wall, and the kind of silence that meant everyone already knew the numbers were bad. Orpheus looked simple on the schematic. Most traps do when drawn from above. Surface platform, lift core, transfer spine, lower ring, ballast shafts, emergency ascent bell-mounted portside beneath the service collar. 5 years had done nothing to make Tess's chest loosen at the sight of it. N had died in Chamber B, lower ring east. Delay in vent authorization, the report said. Cascading failure. Necessary restraint until pressure equalization could be confirmed. By the time confirmation arrived, his lungs had already quit trying. Tess had read the report once. She had memorized it against her will. Vale tapped the map with a knuckle. Surface platform took a blast 23 minutes ago. Heat signature says engine deck and manifold controls got hit first. Helix has tugs moving in, and a legal posture already written. The lower ring is still drawing power from backup. That part is interesting. You have dive capability? Mixed gas. 1 bow, 1 pilot, 1 medic, 1 old bastard who can still run a chamber if his hands stay friendly. We were servicing a survey client. Now we're wherever the work is. Depth? 580 feet. Tess looked at the schematic again. Transfer spine will be half flooded by now. If they purge from the surface manifold, it becomes a pipe. That your technical term? It's the one that matters. Vale watched her for half a second. Sloane said you know the site. I used to. Good enough. We can put you in the bell in 12 minutes if you're willing to be stupid on purpose. The answer was already in her body. It had been there since the first time Mara said her name over open comms. Tess nodded. Get me the latest internal layout. If they've repurposed any of the lower rings since I was there, I want it before I breathe mixed gas. One of the operators slid a tablet across to her. Tess took it. New partitions. Data vault added aft. Environmental buffer narrowed. They had tightened the living space to make room for extraction support equipment not listed in the public filing. Helix research on paper, Helix recovery underneath it. Same old company habit. Tell the C one story and the investors another. She stopped at one label. Chamber B had been converted to archive storage. Vale saw where her eyes caught. He said nothing. Tess put the tablet down. Who's topside for Helix? Field authority is Calder Mott. The room did not move. Not visibly. But something in Tess went absolutely still. Say that again. Calder Mott, operations chief. She turned back to the schematic. The walls of the room seemed farther away than they had been a second ago. 5 years ago, Calder Mott had stood outside a chamber viewport and told her they could not vent early because the surface manifold readings had not stabilized. He had used the voice men like him, always used when asking someone else to live inside the consequences of their caution. Ben was convulsing on the other side of the glass by then. Mara had been in medical, screaming for override authority. Tess had looked at the clock so hard she could still see it some nights when she woke up. Calder had never raised his own voice. You all right? Vale asked. Tess looked at him. No, he gave that the respect it deserved by not softening it. Can you still do the job? Yes. That was all he needed. They put her in gear fast. Thermal base layer, suit harness, umbilical checks, wrist slate, ale-out bottle, gloves. The ritual steadied her because it was the same everywhere. Rigs, stations, disaster sites, graves. Pressure did not care about your biography. Equipment either held or it did not. That had always been one of the cleaner things about the work. The bell pilot was a broad-shouldered woman named Imogen Shaw, with a scar across the bridge of her nose and the kind of low voice people trusted because it never performed confidence. We go down the west side, avoid the main spine, and dock manual if the collar isn't gone, she said while clipping Tess in. If I say move, you move. If I say leave something, you leave it. You get 1 moment to argue and then I stop respecting you. Seems fair. No, it doesn't. It seems necessary. They sealed the bell. As it lowered into the gulf, the world narrowed the way it always did. Surface noise turned to hull vibration. Then even that thinned out. Tess watched her gloved hand resting against her knee, and felt the first clean edge of purpose come back into her. It had been years. She had not missed it exactly. Missing was too soft a word for something that had once defined the shape of her mind. At 200 feet, Helix Control found their channel. Unauthorized bell. Identify yourself. Imogen muted the external speaker. That'll be Calder or one of his little cousins, she said. At 400, Tess began seeing the sight lights. Orpheus Array lay below them in pieces of hard geometry and wounded glow, a steel insect pinned to the seafloor. The surface platform above was dark on one side, burning on the other. The lower ring still held shape. The transfer spine vented a plume of bubbles from a rupture halfway up. Habitat has power, Imogen said. That's our miracle for the day. They docked against the west maintenance collar with a scrape Tess felt through her boots. The first thing she heard when the seal equalized was Mara's breathing over the internal comm loop. Tess, I'm here. The answer came back rougher now, threaded with exhaustion. I knew you'd come if anyone could get to you before they bury us. Tess swallowed against the pressure in her throat. Survivor count. 6 total. Me. 3 techs. 1 systems diver with a broken leg. Calder. Tess closed her eyes once, then opened them. Condition of lower ring. Losing heat. Losing scrubbers. East passage gone. Bell release panel is locked to command authority and manual override in the ballast access. We can reach one, not both. Why is Calder still alive? Silence. Then, because he has the codes. Tess put a hand on the collar hatch. Mara, she said, and heard too much in her own voice. Don't do that right now. Then tell me one thing. On the other end of the line, somewhere beyond steel and 6 atmospheres of water, she could hear alarms ticking in patient intervals. Mara exhaled. Ben didn't die in a systems failure, she said. Calder held the vent because the chamber loss would have exposed the extraction work. He chose the delay. He did it again tonight. The line went dead. Not faded. Dead. Total. Then the habitat lights below them blinked once and went out. The dark inside Orpheus was complete for 3 seconds. Then emergency strips came on low and red, turning the maintenance corridor into the inside of a wound. Imogen cracked the hatch. Comms? Odd internal only, Tess said. Power rerouted. That's one way to start. They moved. The west maintenance corridor had been narrow when Tess worked here. Helix had made it narrower. New conduit racks lined the ceiling. Fiber trunks and coolant lines ran down the bulkheads where handholds used to be. Their boots rang on the grated floor. Somewhere below them water hit steel hard enough to sound alive. Tess read the structure the way another person might read weather, the pitch of metal under stress, the rhythm of pump cycling, the subtle difference between steam hiss and gas leak. Orpheus was not failing everywhere. It was failing in a pattern. Somebody had told certain systems to die first. Mara met them at the medical lock in a pressure suit unsealed at the throat, dark hair stuck to her temples with sweat, one sleeve striped with somebody else's blood. For a second, the years between them behaved badly. Tess saw the woman she'd once known by sleek sounds and shoulder tension, and the exact way she held a coffee mug when angry. Then the station breathed hot, chemical air into the room, and time remembered itself. Mara did not touch her. You took too long, she said. I came from another ship. Next time be closer. That was so nearly the old rhythm that Tess had to look away. The survivors were in the environmental control bay because it still had door integrity and a manual CO2 meter. 3 techs sat against the wall in emergency blankets with the stillness of people who had learned panic wastes oxygen. The injured systems diver, a kid named Luis by his name patch, had a splinted leg and the pale, precise expression of someone concentrating on not screaming. Calder Mott sat propped beneath a diagnostic console with a bandage around his side and blood dark through the dressing. Age had bent him around the middle since Tess last saw him, but not enough. His eyes found her and understood immediately what room he had just been forced into. Tess, he said, as if they were at a conference and not under the ocean. She crossed the distance in 2 strides and hit him hard enough to bang his head off the console. Imogen caught her before the second blow landed. One moment, the bell pilot said into Tess's ear. You used it. Calder put a shaking hand to his mouth. It came away red. You should have let me die up there, he said. Maybe later, Tess said. Mara handed her a data wafer in a sealed pouch. This is the short version. The site wasn't just research. You already guessed that. Helix has been using the lower ring to test extraction mapping for the Black Current trench fields. Illegal footprint, hidden off public books. Audit team was due in 48 hours. Calder started wiping the archive to protect the field package. He routed a maintenance bypass through a live manifold and blew the surface deck when the pressure equalized wrong. And Ben? Mara looked at Calder, then back at Tess. Same playbook. 5 years ago, the chamber fault would have exposed non-declared equipment in Chamber B. Ben was still alive when Calder refused the emergency vent. Calder closed his eyes. I followed protocol. No one in the room moved. Tess asked the question she had been carrying like a piece of shrapnel for 5 years. Was there enough time? Mara answered. Yes. It did not feel like revelation. Revelation implied brightness. It felt like a door opening in a room she had already lived in too long. Imogen crouched beside Luis's splinted leg. How long until this place stops being a place? Mara checked the wall meter. 90 minutes before 2-2 turns everyone stupid. Less if the scrubber patch gives out. Structural failure could be 10, could be 50. The east passage is gone. The main spine is flooding from above. Tess knelt in front of Calder. Bell release. He laughed once and regretted it immediately. Manual authority transfer won't clear while surface command is active. Then give me the codes. If I do that, Helix loses the sight. Tess put 2 fingers against the edge of his bandage and pressed. Not hard. Just enough. Calder made a sound Luis pretended not to hear. Listen carefully, Tess said. The company already lost the sight. The question is whether it loses you publicly or privately. He breathed through his teeth. Mara watched with the expression of someone too tired to call anything mercy or cruelty. Port Bell authorization, Calder said finally. Sequence Mott 7 Delta. Failsafe token in ballast access south. Tess looked at Mara. Path? Control passage, then service crawl, then ballast ladder. If Purge hasn't locked the fire doors, if it has, Mara's mouth tightened. Then you go through the water. They moved the survivors in order of function, not sympathy. Walking wounded first because they could still obey quickly. Then Luis with Imogen, and one of the techs carrying his weight under the arms. Calder came last, half dragged, half driven. Mara floated along the edges of the group, checking pupils, breathing, coherence, blood loss. Tess took point with a lamp in one hand and a wrench bar in the other. The station kept trying to die around them. A pressure door at Junction C hung 3 inches open on a warped frame. Tess wedged the bar into the gap and put her whole back into it until the opening widened enough for bodies to slip through single file. Water sheeted along the floor on the far side, icy around the ankles. The red emergency strip strobed once and cut out. For 10 blind seconds they moved by lamp and memory. The service crawl was worse. Hotter. Lower. It had been built for cable trays and occasional maintenance crews, not 6 frightened people, and a man everybody wanted dead for different reasons. Calder began to fade there. His head kept dropping. Mara slapped him awake twice. Don't you dare make this easier on yourself, she said. He looked at her with the wet, confused hurt of a man not used to hearing the truth in a woman's voice. At the ballast ladder, Tess keyed the failsafe token into the release panel and got a hard red denial. Surface purged, armed. She stared at the words. He still got command. Calder blinked up at the panel as if it had betrayed him personally. No, I didn't arm it. Vale's voice broke across Tess's suit comm through interference and distance. Tess, surface traffic just changed. Helix tugs are pressurizing the manifold. You have maybe 8 minutes before they dump the spine. Mara stepped to the panel, scanned the diagnostics, and went white in a way that had nothing to do with the habitat lights. He set a conditional trigger, she said quietly. Tess turned. What does that mean? Mara looked at Calder. It means if archive transfer failed and external docking occurred, the station was supposed to purge automatically. One of the techs said, You rigged us to die if anyone tried to get us out? Calder tried to stand straighter and could not. It was not supposed to reach the lower ring. But it did, Mara said. The deck jumped under them. Somewhere aft, a compartment gave way with the deep thunder of structural steel surrendering. Tess made the decision before the fear behind it could catch up. Imogen, take the walking survivors and Luis to the bell collar. Manual prep. Mara with me. Calder too. You want him moving? Imogen asked. I want him looking at every door on the way out. The ballast access was half flooded. Water climbed the shaft runs in black surges. Mara descended with a lamp strapped to her wrist, and Calder's access chip clenched between her teeth. Tess followed, then Calder, then the last tech, a geologist named Wren who had gone so quiet, she frightened Tess a little. At the base of the ladder sat the auxiliary control box that could clear the purge if given command input from somebody with enough authority and enough shame. Calder's hands shook too badly to keep a sequence. Tess held the lamp. Do it. He looked up at her through blood loss and seawater. If I clear it, the record goes out. Everything. Yes. Helix will bury all of us. Then die useful. He keyed the sequence. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the panel flashed purge aborted and the shaft lights came up green. Wren started laughing. High, shocked laughter. The sound of a person whose body had mistaken near survival for joy. The next sound was worse. The pressure door above them slammed. Mara looked up first. Tess. Water came through the ladder opening in a wall that had not existed a second earlier. The shaft took the hit like a struck bell. Wren vanished off the bottom rung with a cry cut short by water. Tess caught Calder's harness with one hand and the ladder with the other. Mara shoved upward, driving Tess ahead of her. They fought their way back to the upper access by instinct and impact. Tess hit the top rung, heaved herself through the narrowing frame, and turned in time to see Mara force Calder's shoulders through after her. Then the worked pressure door, loose on one hinge, dropped the rest of the way. Steel hit steel. The passage between them disappeared. Tess threw herself at it. Mara. From the other side, fate threw metal and flooding water. Get them out. Tess hit the door again. Mara. No answer. Then one. Then nothing. The first thing Tess did was stop hitting the door. Not because she wanted to. Because she knew wasted motion when she felt it. Rage had timing. So did rescue. Imogen appeared at the junction with Luis over one shoulder and fury in her eyes. Bells prepped. We go now or we don't go. Tess was already scanning the overhead. Ballast chamber vents into the south maintenance shaft, she said. There was a drone crawl space behind environmental in the old layout. Old layout was before they turned the place into a lie factory. The load-bearing geometry didn't change. Imogen looked at the sealed door, then at Tess, then made the calculation that good operators make when somebody else's impossible idea is still the best one in the room. 2 minutes, she said. After that I launch this bell with or without your romantic suffering. Fair. Mara had taught Tess years ago that love and triage shared an ugly trait. Both demanded you decide what mattered in time. Tess ran back through the control passage with Wren's abandoned lamp and Calder stumbling behind her, because leaving him unwatched felt, for some reason, too much like forgiveness. The environmental control bay was knee-deep in water now, steam feathered from a burst line near the ceiling. Tess found the drone crawl space exactly where memory said it would be, behind a panel stamped with a maintenance code Helix had never bothered to repaint. She ripped the panel free and shone the lamp into a shaft barely wide enough for a person in partial rig. You're not serious, Calder said. I've been waiting 5 years to stop being reasonable around you. She took his access chip, clipped the data pouch Mara had given her inside her suit, and crawled. The shaft ran hot for 10 feet, then dropped toward cold. Metal screamed somewhere below. Water moved underneath her in invisible force. At the first junction, she had to kick a maintenance drone carcass out of the way. At the second, she nearly missed the turn because the station had twisted enough to make familiar angles strange. Then she heard banging. 3 strikes. Pause. 3 strikes. Mara. Tess dropped out of the shaft into the ballast chamber shoulder first and hit water to the chest. The chamber had canted 20 degrees. One emergency light burned blue through the steam. Mara stood on top of a control cabinet with one arm wrapped around a vertical pipe, face bloodless, lips edged purple from cold. When she saw Tess, she shut her eyes with a force that looked almost like pain. You idiot, Mara said. Rude first greeting for a rescue. Mara laughed once. It turned into a cough. Tess slogged closer. Water shoved at her thighs with every new impact from the station around them. Can you move? Left ankle's bad. Ribs maybe. Pride fatal. Good, pride doesn't weigh much. She got Mara's arm over her shoulders. Up close, the damage showed clearer. Split brow, bluish skin, the tiny tremor of somebody who had been forcing their body to keep bargaining with pain for too long. I thought you left, Mara said into Tess's ear as they fought toward the access ladder. I did. No, I mean this time. Tess adjusted her grip. Not a chance. At the ladder base sat the secondary archive core in a shock case, half submerged, exactly where Mara must have shoved it before the door fell. Take it, Mara said. I'm already carrying you. Take it, Tess. She did. The case clicked to her harness heavy as a promise. The climb back through the shaft was slow, filthy, and physical in the oldest way. No revelation, no speeches. Just muscle, leverage, breath, pain, steel, water. Mara bit down on every sound except one. A small involuntary cry when her bad ankle caught on the lip of the opening. Tess apologized without words, then kept pulling. There was no gentler version of survival available. They spilled back into environmental half-drowned and shaking. Calder was where she had left him, seated against the wall under Imogen's gun-hard stare. Thought you'd run, Tess said. He looked at Mara and began, visibly, to understand what not dying was going to cost him. No one up there is answering me anymore, he said. Helix cut command off the moment the purge failed. Vale came over calm, voice ragged with static. Tess, company tug just broke position. I think they know they're burned. Thel needs to launch now. Imogen got Luis and the others moving again. Tess put Mara into the line, then stopped Calder with a hand to his chest. You open the bell with your face on record, she said. He stared at her. You want confession? I want truth with a pulse attached. Dead men get rewritten. For the first time since she had seen him again, real fear crossed his face. Not of dying, of surviving accurately. The bell caller sat beyond one last bend where the outer hull had split enough to let in a steady blade of freezing water. They crossed it one at a time. Mara nearly went down there. Tess caught her and did not let go again. At the collar, Imogen had the bell clamped manual open and the internal camera recording. Get in, she said. All of you. Calder stopped at the threshold. The camera's green light reflected in his wet eyes. Tess stood beside it, one hand on the hatch wheel, and waited. He might have lied. That was the old skill. He might have hidden inside jargon and regret and the careful ambiguities powerful men call accountability. Maybe he was too cold. Maybe too tired. Maybe the sea had taken all the extra language out of him. My name is Calder Mott, he said to the camera. I delayed an emergency vent 5 years ago at Orpheus Array to protect undeclared extraction equipment and contract exposure. Benjamin Arden died as a result. Tonight I initiated archive wipe procedures that caused the manifold blast. I armed a purge contingency knowing personnel remained below. No one in the collar moved. Calder swallowed. Helix knew what this site was. That was enough. More than enough. Tess shut the hatch. The bell ascent was violent in the way controlled things sometimes are. Cables shuddered. The frame groaned. Mara leaned against Tess with the boneless heaviness of somebody finally allowing themselves to be hurt. Luis cried once quietly in the corner. One of the techs took his hand. Wren stared at the data core clipped to Tess's harness as if it were a religious object or a bomb. Halfway up, the ascent line jerked. Imogen swore and threw her weight across the manual brake. Platform shedding debris. Tess looked through the small round port and saw Orpheus below them, light scaling one section at a time. The lower ring had begun to list into its own scour trench. Black water moved around it in slow muscular coils. Come on, Mara whispered, though Tess could not tell whether she meant the bell or herself. They broke surface into daylight so hard and white it felt unreal. The Caliban hauled them in under crane and shouting. Somebody opened the hatch before it had fully settled and the world rushed back. Cold wind, diesel, human hands, the dirty brightness of survival. Mara was taken first to the deck medic. Luis next, the techs after him. Calder made it 3 steps out of the bell before his knees folded. They put him on a stretcher under restraint and camera both. They'll net Tess at the rail with a headset and a face gone sharp with purpose. We dumped the core and the confession to 3 reporters, 2 regulators and 1 prosecutor before Helix could choke the channel, he said. You just turned their containment event into a homicide file. Tess looked back at the water. Orpheus Array went under without drama. No cinematic explosion. Just a long, slow surrender of steel to depth until the sea lay flat over the place where it had been. Ben had gone that way too, in every official version of the story, quietly, inevitably, as if no one had chosen it. The medic wrapped a thermal blanket around Tess's shoulders and tried to lead her toward the treatment bay. She shook her head once and crossed instead to where Mara sat on a coil of rope with an oxygen cannula under her nose, and her injured ankle splinted. For a second, neither of them spoke. Wind moved Mara's hair across the tape on her brow. Tess reached out and tucked it back because the motion belonged to a life they had once had, and because not doing it suddenly seemed more intimate than doing it. You stayed, Mara said. You asked me not to do anything sentimental. I figured disobedience would feel familiar. Mara smiled, and the damage in it was exactly why Tess trusted it. I left because every room in that place still had your brother in it, Mara said softly, and because every room with you in it knew I had stayed for the report. Tess looked out at the water. I know. Do you? She thought about that. About 5 years spent turning grief into shape and routine because shape and routine hurt less than the exact truth. I know better than I did yesterday, she said. Vale approached without pretending not to hear the softness in the air around them. We pulled one more thing from the transmitted archive, he said, and handed Tess a waterproof audio unit no larger than a deck of cards. Ben's chamber log. Last minute before failure. Tess held it in both hands. Mara watched her carefully. You don't have to. No, Tess said. I do. She pressed play. Ben's voice came out younger than memory had let him stay. Pressure's wrong. Tell Tess not to punch anyone until she knows whose fault it is. The recording crackled. A breath. Metal somewhere close. If she asks, I wasn't scared until the last little bit. Then, quieter. I know she's going to come anyway. The log ended. Tess stood with the wind moving around her and the sea making its patient noise against the hull, and understood with a force that almost took her knees that grief was not always loud when it changed shape. Sometimes it was the smallest possible motion, a locked muscle unclenching, a sentence finally landing where it had always been headed. She handed the player to Mara, who held it like something warm. Behind them on the deck, Calder Mont began giving names to investigators over a live channel. Contracts, dates, supervisors, asset codes. The machinery of the lie, spoken aloud while his blood cooled in the salt air. Tess did not turn to listen. She did not need to hear the whole thing to know the door had closed. She sat down beside Mara on the rope coil. The black gulf rolled under the afternoon light, indifferent and enormous, and no longer in possession of the only version of what had happened down there.